Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking about handling toxic behavior in law school. Your Law School Toolbox host is Allison Monahan, that's me, and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. With that, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we are talking about handling toxicity in law school, whether it's bad behavior from your classmates or overbearing expectations from other people like your parents, professors, and friends. Now let's face it, law school can be a pretty toxic environment. I think that's a common assumption a lot of people make, or a common thing that most people experienced, because it's full of pressure. It tends to make people depressed or anxious. I think there was that article or the new study that came out about how depressed law students were recently. That's depressing. I don't even know how else to describe it.
I think those keep coming out and they keep saying the same thing, which is like, wow, there's a lot of depression among law students. What's going on here?
Yeah. Substance abuse can become a problem in law school, and so on. So we don't want to scare you if you haven't started law school yet, but it is important to understand why the law school environment can kind of lead to people struggling with these issues. And it's better to be prepared and have some tools to handle the situations that you're likely to encounter, instead of just letting them kind of bring you down and then put you at risk for some of these struggles that a lot of law students have.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think the reality is, like you said, law school can be really stressful. I think a lot of people experience it as being difficult in a way that maybe education hasn't been difficult for them before. And I think you want to make sure you have the tools in place, the support structure in place, so that when you do encounter some obstacles or you start feeling really bad about yourself or whatever it is, maybe when you first get your grades back, you have people and resources that you can turn to. Mm-hmm. But let's back up a little bit. I mean, so I think one of the key reasons that this happens really has a lot to do with expectations, mm-hmm. because these can cause a lot of problems, whether it's expectations from yourself about how you're going to perform, or these external expectations from your family, your parents, your professors, the school, maybe friends, classmates. Like everybody, I felt like had an idea of what I should be doing in law school. Yeah. And they were not shy about expressing that opinion.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about this. I mean, who and what expectations do you think really impact people's law school experiences?
Well, I think especially for younger law students, family and parents, and the expectations that come from that part of their life can be very heavy. Oftentimes, your family or your parents have pushed you to go to law school. Maybe they want you to be a certain type of lawyer. They might want you to be a corporate lawyer so you can make a whole bunch of money to take care of yourself.
Take care of them.
They may have unrealistic expectations even for how well you will perform, especially if they are not lawyers or are not familiar with the law school environment. They don't understand necessarily things about the curve and the fact that law school is a different beast than undergrad. And so I think it can also be challenging to talk to your family about your law school choices, about where you're going to go, or even how you're doing in your classes, if they have different expectations, because maybe you were a straight A student in college, but it's not working out in the same way in law school.
Right. I mean, I think it's fair to say almost no one is going to be a straight A student in law school. And a lot of people who came into law school, that's been your experience in the past. I mean, let's face it, there's a rampant grade inflation in most undergraduate universities in the U.S. right now.
Right.
And I think, the family stuff can be a lot. Mm-hmm. These are the people who theoretically care about your well-being. You probably value their opinion. I mean, in some cases, people have been telling you ever since you were a young child, like, oh, you're going to be such a great lawyer. You have to be a lawyer. You love to argue. You should definitely go to law school. And in certain cases, I mean, I've heard stories of people's parents threatening to straight up not support them if they don't do this.
Yeah.
So I think all of this stuff can be a lot. I mean, I know your parents were lawyers, Lee. What was their reaction? I mean, did they encourage law school? Were they surprised when you went?
I think they were surprised that I was very interested in going, because for years and years and years I had said I would never go and never follow in their footsteps.
I mean, you basically grew up like in court part of the time, right?
Yeah. Like when we would have this thing where I'm from, it gets really foggy in the Central Valley of California. So we'd have these foggy day schedules, which is kind of like a partial snow day. Like none of the buses will run to school and the schools start late. And so I spent like my childhood listening to Calendar in courtrooms, because one of my parents would be having to go to court and I would be like 6 sitting in the back waiting for somebody to take me to school.
Man, this does not seem fun.
Yeah. I think actually how I described it to my dad once was, wow, that seems like nothing got done. And he's like, from the mouths of babes.
Yeah, because most calendar hearings are like, okay, so we showed up to talk about this thing. Has anyone done what they're supposed to do? Oh, you need another extension. Okay, We're going to do another extension. Exactly. We'll talk again in a few weeks. See you then.
Yeah, pretty much. So I grew up around it a lot. I mean, I went to bar association functions as a young child. I grew up around judges. It was a big part of my life in my childhood. FBI agents, all of that stuff. And it was very interesting, but I didn't want to be part of that world. And I don't know if that was because it didn't interest me, or that slight rebellious nature that a lot of us as kids have of like, I don't want the life my parents have. Right. Although I did think they worked a lot, which was part of it. But my parents were very like careful not to try and pressure or over encourage me to go to law school. But when I sat for the LSAT, and I remember being home for a holiday and then saying like, okay, well, I think this is the list of schools I'm going to apply to. And I remember my mom saying, oh, so you're really going to go? Like, can I get excited now? Because I've been trying not to be excited because I just didn't know what would happen. And she's like, but if you're going to apply, you're probably going to go, right? I'm like, I'm probably going to go. So they were kind of hands off, I think, in that respect. But it was nice that they did have realistic expectations of what the law school experience and the bar experience were like, because they were able to be, more supportive than I think a lot of family members who don't know what that's like. And it can be strange and challenging to like see the law school world from the outside and try and even help guide your adult children through that. So it's hard. I think in a way I was fortunate that my family was so familiar with the experience, so I didn't get a lot of unrealistic expectations. But, they also were not trying to make me do this. But if you know me, I'm not really one of those people that you can make do very many things. So.
Probably not. Yeah, I think I literally actually forgot to tell my parents I was applying to law school. I did it pretty suddenly without thinking that carefully about it. But I remember there was a point where I was like, oh, I should probably tell them I'm moving across the country. And I'm not sure I mentioned why I'm doing this. Different era. Mm-hmm. Definitely not the helicopter era. Yeah, and I think, sometimes people, even if they're well-meaning, they can create a lot of additional pressure for the student by saying things like, oh, well, I'm sure that you'll do well. Like, you're really smart. Right. And this goes back to one of our very first podcasts about mindset, where, telling someone like, oh, I'm sure law school is not going to be a struggle for you because you've always been really smart, is probably not the best thing to say to your child who's starting law school. You need to be a little bit more understanding. Like, well, I'm sure this is going to be a challenge, but you can handle it. Right. So, I think even without meaning to, even well-meaning parents can put a lot of pressure. Because what happens if you don't do that well in your first midterm, or you get your grades and they're not that great? Does that mean you're not smart? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that can be the takeaway message here.
Yeah. I also think that if you're starting law school and you're really doing it for your parents because they want you to go to law school, we have seen that can create some challenges because you oftentimes aren't all in the experience. And if you don't really want to practice law or work as a lawyer, you probably shouldn't be in law school because you're going to probably hate it and not do that well. And then you're not going to want to like continue on that path.
You're not going to want to practice.
You're not going to want to practice. And then it's like you struggle with the bar and then you're like, well, maybe I shouldn't even take the bar. I don't even want to be a lawyer. And
right. Or like we've talked to people who have failed the bar thinking, oh my gosh, I'm really going to have to comfort them. They're going to be so upset. And you talk to them and they're like, this is the best day ever. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Like, well, it just made me realize I don't really want to be a lawyer. And I don't want to pass the bar. And I probably knew that all along.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, like you did know this all along. So why did you put yourself through 3 years of that and spend $200,000? Like you should have just said, like, you know what? I don't think I want to do this before you failed the bar.
Yeah. So Allison, if your parents are not connected to the legal field and don't have a lot of exposure to the law school experience, like what do you think you can do to kind of help them understand the experience? Other than maybe watch some movies? I don't know.
I say watch the movies. I think we have some blog posts on like, what your parents can do to help you.
Yeah.
I mean, on some level, you may just not be able to do all that much. You may just have to kind of suck it up and deal with them. And kind of put it to one side, like, okay, I understand they're trying to be helpful and they say these things, but it's not helpful. So I'm just going to put it over here and not really worry about it. I remember when I was graduating from Columbia, it was law review, the whole bit. My mother's like, are you sure you're going to be able to get a job? I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, why am I having this conversation? But at the same time, I was like, okay, whatever. Like, you have your crazy thing going on. It has nothing to do with me. I guess part of this is also just about, really growing up and really separating from your parents and saying, okay, you have this opinion on what I should do, and that's not what I want to do. So I'm going to do me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a necessary part of the, experience of becoming a grown-up.
It is. And I think having some frank conversations with your parents or your family members about what the law school experience is like and try and at least maybe desensitize them a little bit to some of the realities can be a good idea. It may not sink in at first, but, we've talked about even using the holidays as an example. A lot of families are like, what do you mean you're not coming home for Thanksgiving? Usually Thanksgiving is days before final exams start.
Right.
And it can be really impractical for students, especially to travel cross country or to travel places where they could get stuck in weather and things like that. And so, laying this foundation and saying like, during the semester, this is really has to be my priority and exams are such a big deal. So, it looks like maybe Thanksgiving won't happen this year, but I have 3 weeks off for the winter break and I will make sure to be around family. Like just being really kind of clear and honest. Maybe you can follow up with an email because oftentimes...
Tell about boundaries as usual.
Yeah. So just things to think about.
And the other thing too is you don't have to tell your parents what your grades are.
That's true.
Particularly, in any case, but also particularly if they're not paying for it. If you're taking out loans and paying for this yourself, I think it's totally valid to be like, I'm doing fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Like, you're a grown-up. And, there are all kinds of federal laws and things about this. They can't just call up your teachers and, ask how you're doing, even if they threaten to.
Yeah, I think that's very true. So what about your professors in your school? What sort of expectations do law students feel from, the school end of things?
Well, again, I think this is a situation where they may think that they have your best interest at heart, but that may not correspond with, your view of what you want out of this experience. Let's face it, the schools basically want you to get a certain type of job, preferably one that's prestigious and you'll make a lot of money so that then you'll be happy and you can donate. Mm-hmm. And that job may or may not correspond to the job that you want. But particularly at certain schools, there's going to be a ton of pressure to try to get a large firm job. Mm-hmm. And that's just something to be aware of going in.
Yeah, I think it is. And again, you have to, it's always important to get used to looking at things from the perspective of, what is the interest that the person has who's sharing this advice or moving this in my direction? Are they just, do they have my own interest at heart or are they, the school has its own interests, they have
a vested interest. They want you to be, they want you to be a happy alum, but that has a certain meaning.
Mm-hmm.
in their mind at least.
Yeah. And even professors, oftentimes they're very excited about the area of the law that they practice or that they practiced in, and they think that's the best solution.
Oh, yeah. Or like whatever path they took is the path you should take, and if they're a professor in a law school, they took a certain path, They presumably did a certain type of clerkship and they worked a certain type of job, and that may or may not correspond to what you want. I mean, I remember when I was applying for clerkships, at the end of my second year, I'd finally had enough of people telling me what to do. And I had a professor who I TA'd for him. He was writing a reference letter, the whole bit. And he was really insistent that I basically really, really, really ought to consider applying for appellate clerkships. And he's like, I'm sure you can get one. It's a great experience. This is what I did, blah, blah, blah. It'll set you up for this and blah, da, da, da. And I was like, that is not what I want to do. That's not the experience I want to have. Like, I want to go in an actual courtroom. Because unlike you, Lee, I didn't grow up, sitting in the back of the court. I'm like, I want to see how this actually works.
Right.
And in the end, whatever, he didn't care that much. He wrote me whatever letters I wanted for whatever judges I wanted. But it was really, a lot of pressure of like, okay, I understand that you're saying I could do this really prestigious thing and it would be great and the school would be happy, but I don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Like, always remember that this is your career and your path, and and you need to stay somewhat authentic, or you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're like, how did I get here? And then,
and we've counseled students who are on the verge of making like terrible decisions about jobs to take. And I think the clerkship thing really brings a lot of this out, because sometimes it's, this professor who really likes me has a friend and they say that they can probably get me an interview. And I'm like, yeah, but that person is working in a location you would absolutely hate, has politics that are diametrically opposed to yours, and generally doesn't seem like a very nice person to work for. Oh, but they're so prestigious.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, this is your life.
Exactly.
You don't have to make every decision based on the prestige factor if you're going to be miserable.
Yes. Yeah, I totally agree. I've also heard in the classroom and somewhat seen this play out in different settings where folks feel like that only certain types of viewpoints are rewarded in class discussions. So this could be about political slant. This could be a big issue for minority students who oftentimes are asked to represent their gender or ethnicities in the class, for a different perspective, I think.
Right. I was like, we're talking about an affirmative action case. So, one minority in the student in the class, would you like to talk about that again? And, people can be like, no, I don't want to be the person who always has to talk about this. Right. Ask somebody else.
Yeah.
I remember, when I was at Columbia, there was a lot of law and econ stuff going on. And so it was always like, we've got this boo-hoo-hoo, hippie perspective. But of course, no one really cares about that. And, people who did care about it were like, actually, I do have a point of view on this. And I would appreciate it being taken seriously.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can be draining, I think, to just always be feeling like you're not the person who belongs there, or your viewpoint makes you not fit in or something like that. That can be super draining for people.
Yeah. It's just something to watch for. I mean, Allison, do you think that some of this is hard to avoid, but as you're through your law school experience, you can hear about professors where this might be more of a problem than others? Don't you think that's one way that you can try and avoid this?
Yeah, I think A, you can try to avoid it, and then B, I think you can also hear, people who might be more sympathetic to your own viewpoint, just more open in general to different viewpoints. You might consider taking classes with those people instead of someone who's known to be, a completely misogynistic jerk.
Yeah.
Why put yourself through that?
Yeah. That makes sense.
Basically no class is worth it if the professor is going to be berating you every day for some inchangeable characteristic.
Yeah, that's very true. What other ways do the professors or schools kind of create ridiculous expectations or make it hard for people to succeed?
Well, I think, in some cases the workload is just totally excessive. It's normal to feel like you're doing a lot of work, but there are certain professors who just seem to get a kick out of like really making things ridiculous.
Yeah.
And again, like if you're a 1L, like maybe there's nothing you can do about that. But, you know, after that point, why subject yourself to it?
Yeah.
And even as a 1L, I mean, at some point you may just have to draw the line and say, you know what, like this is not physically possible to do, and I'm just not going to do it, and I'm going to stop worrying about it.
Yep. I think that's very true.
I mean, I'll admit I didn't do my con law reading my first semester or first year because the professor would assign like 80 pages a night. And I'm like, you can't read 80 pages of con law for each class. Like that's not reading, like, and you know, then we wouldn't even really talk about it. So at some point it's like, you know what, like, even though I might want to learn the subject, I'm not going to learn it right now. I'll take an upper level elective if I really want to learn it. And I'm just got to get through this class and get through the exam.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. What about friends and classmates? I think when people think of a toxic law school environment, I think that's probably the first thing they think about, don't you think?
I think that's probably true. And I think, you know, the classmates thing can be a pro or a con. You know, like you might find your people and they're really supportive, but I think there's also, you know, pressure from various perspectives to do a bunch of things, you know, whether it's never making a mistake or always being competent. Mm-hmm. You know, you're supposed to look like you have it all together, but you're not really trying. Like, oh, you know, I just never have time to do my reading, when actually you're in the, you know, hiding out in your, like in the back of the library, like 12 hours a day. I mean, the flip side, sometimes at certain schools, there's pressure to like work even longer and harder than you think you need to. Like, oh, you know, I'm working 20 hours a day. What do you mean you slept for 7 hours? Like, you're going to fail all your exams.
Right.
It's just like, oh, come on.
Yeah. I mean, and I think everyone who's graduated from law school has a story of at least one or more people playing that game. You know, what time do you study until the library? Oh, you don't do that? Like, I can't believe you don't do XYZ. I do that every day. I mean, there are so many examples of students trying to feel superior based on the work that they do. But the reality is that everybody's just doing the best they can. And in the end, nobody knows how you studied and got through law school. So you do you, and worry about, let other people worry about themselves.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think this is a classic example of what's the phrase, like you're comparing your inside to everyone else's outside, where like they might seem like they're super put together and they always have like a cute outfit and makeup and raising their hand in class. But like they're also, I can guarantee you, like breaking down in their bedroom sometimes and being like, I don't belong here. Everyone's smarter than I am. You know? Yeah. They just don't let you see, people don't let you see that, but that's what happens.
And again, I think so maybe social media is another place to be careful about this, because I think this is an area where people can often feel like, you know, other law students or people in their law school who maybe they become friends with their social media are, they have it all together. Like, oh, look, I'm at the gym. Oh, look, I have fresh flowers in my house. Oh, look, I cooked this healthy meal, you know.
Oh, look at my cute dog, you know, right. Taking my dog on a walk. Or, you know, travel stuff. I mean, there's also, law school is one of those places where there can be a lot of weird pressure and expectations around having money, because oftentimes there are a lot of people there who come from, you know, well-off backgrounds, and it's like, oh, here's my like Thanksgiving trip to the Turks and Caicos, and you're thinking, oh my God, I don't know if I'm going to have money to eat for the rest of the semester because my student loans are running out. Like, am I a total loser? You know?
Right. And so, you know, I think social media is a trap that we can all fall into with comparing ourselves to other people. I think that's one of the reasons why social media can make people feel so inadequate and generally makes people feel more unhappy, which is
there's studies.
There's studies, more studies. But it's just good to have that awareness, you know, of comparing your experiences to other people's experiences when you don't even know the details of their experiences. You really just have to try and worry about yourself.
You really have no idea. I mean, you have no idea what other people are dealing with. I mean, they may put on a front that everything's amazing, but then it turns out that, you know, there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on in their lives. So, yeah, I think, you know, you've just got to kind of do you here. I mean, there can also be a lot of pressure to do things like drink heavily or really frequently that, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I ever drank as much as I did in law school. It was a combination of being in New York City and being in law school, but it was suddenly like, oh, wow, a normal night of drinking might be 4 or 5 drinks, you know, and you know, in retrospect, you're like, that was binge drinking on a Tuesday, But it just seemed normal because that, you'd go maybe to a talk and they would be serving alcohol, and then you'd go out for a couple of drinks afterwards, and then maybe you'd meet some friends, and then before you know it, like that's a normal Tuesday. Yeah. And I'm not sure that's really a great habit to get into for a lot of people.
No, and I think it also has something to do with different stages in life when you go to law school. I mean, I went to law school, I started when I was 26, I think. But the thing was, I had already worked for a number of years. I was out of my, partying days of college. And then I would go to, a bar night or something along those lines and think, oh, I will just have a few drinks, and then head back home. And then people who are 22, 23, who just come straight through undergrad are partying like it's not, I was going to say 1999, but that's totally a bad example for in 2018, but that are partying in a way that I was like, I don't do that on Tuesdays anymore. I got to get up to go to, to go to 8 a.m. class the next day. So you just have to start to be honest with yourself about, what you need and where you are in your life. And it's okay if you don't, if you don't want to party like that anymore. It's fine. If you're a parent or if you've got other family responsibilities or if you work part-time, you just have to realize that that's okay if people want to do that sort of stuff, but you have to figure out what you need to be successful.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on that note, let's kind of talk about how people can really deal with all of these sort of expectations. I mean, what do you think?
Well, you and I are big fans of therapy.
Therapy, life coaches, pretty much anyone who can be a sounding board who actually does not have any other interest other than helping you figure out what you really want.
Yep, exactly. And I think we've talked in the podcast before, oftentimes your law school will have therapy resources for free. And if you've never been to therapy and you want to try it out, it's a great time to try and meet somebody. I think you do want to try and find some sort of sounding board to help you make some of these decisions and navigate the situations, like you said, Allison, with somebody who doesn't have a vested interest.
Right.
And sometimes, trying to figure out what you really want, we keep saying you do you, that can be really hard. It's not always easy and clear cut.
No, the reality is a lot of people who've gotten into law school, we're all teacher's pet type people their entire lives because that makes you really good at academics and that's how you get to law school. But that meant basically that you've been performing your entire life for what grownups wanted you to do, whether it's your teacher, your parents, whoever. And it is actually, I think, really difficult to kind of take a step back and say, okay, what do I want here? And that's a question a lot of people really, I think, haven't asked themselves with a lot of seriousness by the time they arrive in law school, shockingly enough.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And sometimes that's a question that you have to constantly go back to because let's say you do really well academically and then all of a sudden certain job opportunities are presented to you. Then the question becomes, do you take those job opportunities? Are they authentic to you? Is that really what you want to do? And oftentimes you can kind of be shuttled in a certain direction by the situation. And then all of a sudden you're like, how did I end up in this career path? Oh, that's right. Because I didn't know what I wanted. And so I couldn't advocate for myself.
Right, exactly. It's like you're going to advocate for everyone else as a lawyer, but you're advocating for yourself. Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to understanding, internal versus external motivations. There's a lot of studies on this too. So doing something which you find interesting or satisfying typically is going to be better long run than doing it because you're going to get some type of reward for it, whether that reward is money or prestige or whatever. People telling you oh my God, it's so impressive that you got that clerkship. Oh, you must be so happy. And you're secretly yeah, actually, I kind of wanted to take this fellowship doing something else, but got to do it. And then, you wake up and it's like the song, how is this my life, basically?
Yeah. I think you also have to practice releasing control, which is very hard because you cannot control.
What?
I know, because I think it's very hard for law students because oftentimes law students are high achievers and they can usually get whatever they're reaching for. You set a goal and then you make it happen. It might not be pretty, it might not be perfect, but you make it happen. Well, things like grades, in law school or even sometimes job opportunities, you can't control them. And so you have to start being okay with things not going perfectly and you not being able to get everything you want. And trust me from personal experience, it's very hard because I am somebody who likes to get what I want and work to get
what I want, when I want it, how I want it.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean,
hard.
you control the amount of work you do, you control what you work on, you control the input basically, but ultimately you don't control the output. And I think that is a very difficult thing for people to grapple with, particularly if they have not been in an educational experience that had a really strict curve before, because it's a harsh wake-up call. You've got to be realistic. Like, you're not going to get all A's. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think that's really true.
It's not going to happen. I don't care who you are. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's okay. You just can't expect it to happen and feel like a failure because it didn't happen. It's not going to happen. Just go with it.
I also think you have to take some time to be thoughtful about what you take on and what you demand from yourself. So I think almost every single law student at some point or another felt completely overwhelmed by the amount of responsibility or tasks that they had on their plate, whether it be, for me, it was my my first semester, second year, where I was doing on-campus interviewing. So I was going to all these callbacks. I was a teaching assistant, so I was running kind of tutoring sessions. I took too many units of hard classes at once, which I should not have done.
Probably doing law review too.
I was also doing law review and, all of these other things. And then, no wonder I was running around with like a chicken with my head cut off all the time because I had way too much on my plate. And my outcomes wouldn't have changed if I had been a little more thoughtful and said, maybe I shouldn't take con law and evidence in the same semester that I'm doing all this other stuff. Maybe I should take evidence next semester when I'm not so busy and just, and lighten my course load a little bit because I have all these other responsibilities. My outcomes and how I did in law school wouldn't have changed, but I would have been a lot less crazed. And at that point, I was single. I didn't have a family. I didn't have a dog or a cat. I think I had a houseplant. I didn't have a lot of other responsibilities. I didn't have an ill family member or anything like that. And I was still kind of pushing myself and going crazy. So you do have to be reasonable about how much you take on and be thoughtful about what else you have in your life and realize that if you need to take a break because you're getting burned out or you're really pushing yourself to the edge, that's not quitting. It's just having healthy habits, and that's going to pay off in the long run.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that second year also can just be the time that this starts to happen. Now it was similar, the same thing for the first semester. Like, you're doing law review for the first time and you're trying to figure out how that works, and it's a ton of time. And then I was also TAing. I think I took a pretty light class load. I think that's the only thing I'll give myself credit for. But, and I had 8 million other things going on. I was running all these clubs and, at some point it's just like, okay, what is the point of this? So I do think considering particularly how to organize your class schedule when you have more control over that can really help because, this is it's a marathon. You've got 3 years to get through. And frankly, you're going to be kind of bored the third year anyway. So put some of those harder classes that third year and you'll actually be able to focus on them.
And sometimes some of those harder classes are actually bar classes.
Yeah.
And there can be benefits from taking them in your third year. When you think about the curve, you're a better law student typically in your third year than you're in your second year. And if it's going to be a mixed class of second and third year students, oftentimes it behooves you to wait because you might be even better prepared than the 2Ls, and it might be easier to get to the top of the curve.
I took Fed Courts as a 3L with a bunch of 2Ls who were on the law review who all wanted like the review or the letter of reference from the professor. And I was just like, I just think it sounds kind of interesting. And I've got plenty of time now, so I'll take this class.
Yeah.
It was great. Loved it. Learned a lot. Wasn't really stressed. They were like a total mess.
Yeah, exactly. And the other nice thing is if you take some of those bar classes closer to the bar, then you might remember them for the bar, and then you don't have to study as hard for the bar.
Yeah, I did evidence my last semester, and I would say that was a really good decision.
Yeah, I think that is a great decision, actually, if you can. I know that some people want to do internships or externships that require evidence, and so that's why a lot of 2Ls feel like they have to take it in their 2L year. But you should still be thoughtful about the classes you do have the option to move around, because taking a ridiculous course load so you can't get everything done really doesn't, it doesn't make anything better. If anything, you're risking your performance dropping, which is going to make getting a job or getting that externship or internship that you wanted a lot harder because you have pushed yourself so far.
Yeah, and I think you can also think about mixing in paper classes, like, 1 or 2 a semester, so that the end of the term isn't so insane. You've got to be careful. I once accidentally took 3 paper classes in a semester, which was not a good idea. And one of them was actually twice as long as I thought it was when I took the class. So I was like writing and writing and writing. I'm like, why is this paper not finished? And then I realized it was actually like, a 30-page paper, and I thought it was a 10-page paper or something. You're like, okay, how did this happen? So, you got to be careful. Like, you have options, but you need to really think about, what's reasonable. I mean, you've got to be reasonable about what you can do, and be nice to yourself. I mean, I think a lot of law students put so much pressure on themselves and, have really terrible conversations with themselves that they would never have with a friend of theirs who was in a similar situation about, you're so lazy, you should be like getting up at 4 a.m. I mean, that's just not productive.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What about sleep? We always like to talk about sleep.
Yeah, I think it's a big issue for a lot of people. I mean, it's hard to wind down if you're working late. I think it's one of those things you just have to deal with, like whether it is having good sleep hygiene, as they call it, winding down, turning off the TV, turning off your devices, or if you need to talk to a doctor and say, I can't sleep, like, do you need an occasional sleeping aid, that kind of thing. But I think it's something to take seriously.
Yeah. And if you're not sleeping, you need to investigate other ways that you can try and get more sleep. So, yes, you can go to your doctor, you can talk to sleep aids. There are also supplements. There's turning off all of your devices. There's darkening your room. I mean, there's no shortage of
like guided meditations, all sorts of things, aromatherapy, whatever works.
Yeah.
Getting exercise during the day, like, a lot of people have issues in the winter with not getting enough light and that causing problems. There are solutions to these problems, but you have to seek them out.
Yeah, and don't wait until you are so sleep deprived that you are like feeling depressed and not being able to function. Like try and
trust me, it will literally make you crazy.
Yeah.
I basically didn't sleep for like 3 weeks during final exams my first semester, and I went completely nuts.
Yeah.
It's not something I recommend. Deal with it.
Turns out REM sleep kind of important.
Yeah, really, really not a good look when you have been getting maybe 4 hours of sleep for a month. Things don't go well in the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think one of the other things that's important to do is to do things regularly that remind you wanted to go to law school. So
right, like this is a choice.
Yeah. This is a choice. It's actually a privilege.
Right.
A lot of people wish they could go to law school and can't. So you're spending a lot of money to be there. You're there voluntarily. Like there's a reason why you went. So connecting to that motivation can help you filter out all the clutter from what other people want from you and remind yourself about the work that you are there to do or the clients that you're there to serve. And to sound kind of a little bit sappy, like the privilege of being able to be educated in the law, which can shepherd people through really, really challenging times. And I think pro bono work can really open your eyes to that and show them the meaning of that bar card. And
yeah, I think that's right.
And the power of the kind of the status of being able to say, like, I can help you, like I can be your phone call. The first time that you are able to help a client who is not able to help themselves, I think is a really powerful moment. And if you do that in law school, then you can really connect with that motivation and that can help you get through the more challenging times.
I think that's right. I mean, one of our tutors even sometimes encourages her incoming law students to write themselves a letter that they can read at some point in the semester when they're thinking, oh my gosh, why am I doing this? She actually says, write that down before you start, and then pull out that letter when things get tough. And say, oh, yeah, right. Okay, this is what I was thinking made sense for me. Like, this is why I'm here. And really reconnecting to that motivation, because you are going to face difficult times and you're going to face times you probably think like, oh, my gosh, I don't belong here. That's normal. You just have to get through that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you are a student who is struggling, especially with things like imposter syndrome, which I think a lot of people feel at one point or another in their legal careers, especially first generation students, women, students of color, minority students. You want to not let that kind of cloud what you're doing. And so, reach out to mentors, resources to make sure that you are doing the best that you can. Sometimes that's why some folks really like working with, an academic tutor, like one of the tutors on our team, or getting help from academic support at their school, because there's like a person they could be honest with without judgment around some of the stuff that's going on. And I think, going back to people feeling judged in class or judged in office hours or talking to a professor, you can find a safe space to be honest and work through some of this stuff. And it can really be a game changer.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think you just have to keep in mind, like, what you're going through is probably not that unique. I mean, somebody's probably been through it before. So look for those people who seem like they would be supportive, whether it's, in some sort of affinity group that you're involved in, or a mentoring program, or even people that, maybe you see on social media or whatnot. I mean, I know there are a lot of law professors now on Twitter, for example, and some of them say, look, I'm open to talk to anyone. Like, if you're struggling, you send me a direct message and, like, I'll talk to you. And that's a huge resource. Yeah. And maybe somebody who's not at your school that you feel more confident, and they're probably gonna be like, you know what? I've heard what you're telling me 6 times before, and here's what I suggest. Like, you're not alone in this.
Yeah. I also think that sometimes it can just be helpful to have someone on the outside say, you are smart enough to be here. You got in for a reason. You have these other credentials. Like, somebody saw something in you. Like, this is where you're supposed to be, and you can do this. And I think sometimes, especially if you don't get that validation from your family and friends, you want to, you really want to be able to seek out those mentors or those resources so you can make sure that you're getting that motivation. And also then sometimes insight, because if you, let's say, weren't like me and you didn't grow up with lawyer parents, it can be hard to figure out how to navigate the law school kind of minefield, and having good mentors or resources is going to help you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. I mean, there are resources out there, but they're probably not going to come to you. So, when you're struggling, unfortunately, it's probably the harder time to look and find these people. So try to get them in place earlier. But there's always someone who's probably gone through a similar experience and survived it and gotten through the bar and become a lawyer. And they're like, yes, that was worth it. So, you got to look for those people.
Yeah. I also, one last thing, and then I know we are running low on time, so when I hit our other talking points, but I've also had students who have been rocked by something in their life that made law school incredibly challenging, whether it be an external factor of something happening to something in their family. Maybe they went through something really personally challenging. Maybe they decided to get sober during law school or around graduation, or various other things that are kind of very pivotal moments in their lives. And I think a lot of people think that those make them less worthy to become lawyers. And I would argue the opposite. I think that the experiences that we have make us these unique individuals that are going to make you a very special lawyer, able to help people and connect with people in a very different way, no matter what sort of law that you end up practicing. And you're helping yourself become your best self, which is going to make you better at everything you do. So be very careful not to let stumbling blocks in your life define your law school experience or your law school graduation or your bar study, because those two things don't have to align. They are just part of life, and life doesn't stop for law school, and they just become part of kind of the tapestry that you are, that allows you to go forth and, be successful in whatever path you choose.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, your experiences are what they are. And I think the goal is to sort of turn those into something that you can look back on and say, that was really difficult. That was a huge challenge in my life, but I got through it, and here I am now.
Yeah. So what about some, switching gears, some bad behavior from classmates? We've talked about this a little bit, about the comparing yourself and talking about how much you're studying or how many interviews you have.
I was just shocked. People did some crazy stuff where you're just like, really? Just mean, really mean things. And also just a lot of just kind of silly I remember one case our first semester where someone in my TA group like spread a rumor that the TA had given her special help, special outlines that nobody else was getting, which of course was not true. And all these people freaked out about it, and it became this huge thing. And then she had to admit that it never happened. And she's like, what are you thinking?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, people do all sorts of crazy things. I think you have to remember that a lot of other law students are stressed and anxious and
maybe just frankly not very nice people.
Or not very nice people.
The same person did like another terrible thing later. So I'm just kind of like, you know what? You're not a very nice person.
Yeah. So, I think it's just important to remember that people are going through all sorts of different things, or they're just not very nice. And it's your job to step back and try not to engage, because
I mean, it's a point I think you just have to be like, okay, this is cuckoo crazy. I'm not going to let this impact me. Even if you do have the magic outline, which I don't even think you do, I'm just going to focus on studying. It's fine.
Yeah. I think it's just so important to realize that you don't want to take on other people's toxic stuff. And that can mean leaving a study group, or even, distancing yourself from friends, whatever it needs to be. It can be tough to do those things, but it's going to serve you in the end. And sending you down your own spiral doesn't serve anything either. So
no, I mean, exactly. I think the study group is a great example. If you're in a supportive study group, fantastic. If you're in a study group, you feel like you're not getting much support, or people are being mean to you, or they're just being, whatever. It's totally fine just to say, you know what, I'm leaving. You don't have any actual obligations to that group. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Allison, if you're feeling like, though, that the toxic environment at school or certain folks are really behaving badly, who do you think you go to at school if you want to get some help?
Well, I mean, I think, a lot of this depends on the exact behavior and the scale of it. I mean, I think, if somebody's claiming the TA is giving them special favors or whatever, I mean, I think you can go to that person, or, to the TA or to the professor and say hey, this is pretty crazy. There may be kind of academic or social support people. I think you have to be a little careful, because you don't want to be like that person who's just complaining about gossip or rumors. Mm-hmm. But, if it's something serious and it's impacting you, I think it is worth probably trying to work it out and talk to someone about it.
Right. Yeah. And, maybe you have friends or or even other student mentors or a professor at school that you can even find out who's the right person to go to. Because I know at some schools, there are people in the dean's office that are really great to talk to. Sometimes it's their role. Sometimes it's just who they are as a person. But, or sometimes
I think it's hard to identify an exact role, because usually there are these people who are kind of known to be that person you talk to about things, but it's not oftentimes directly in their job description.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So the reality is, though, that there are probably going to be people at school that you can reach out to. So don't suffer in silence.
And sometimes, too, you can go with more than one person. I think that can be an effective tactic if several people go and complain about the same thing together, whether it's a professor who maybe is saying things in class that you feel like are not appropriate, or they're targeting a certain group or whatever. Mm-hmm. It looks a lot more powerful if 5 people show up in the dean's office to say, look, this is what happened to me, 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 and no one thinks this is appropriate.
Yeah.
Versus you just going yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So we've talked about a lot of things that other people can do to make law school tougher, but what can we do to ourselves? Let's talk about
self-sabotaging toxic behaviors.
There are a lot of them. I think that we have mentioned a few of them in conjunction with this podcast already, but I think the most common ones can be, not taking care of yourself, lack of sleep, eating crummy food so you get sick all the time, being too stressed, not exercising, not doing any self-care, and also doing mind-numbing activities like watching hours and hours of television, drinking too much. What other self-sabotaging behaviors do you think that a lot of people don't maybe consider self-sabotaging behaviors?
I would say procrastination. That's a big one. Being so overwhelmed that you can't figure out what to work on, or having a plan, just not being able to execute on it. Procrastination basically is because you're afraid to fail. I mean, That's kind of the basis of it. So, finding some support around that, whether it's an accountability partner or a tutor or, just some way to deal with it. I think, the drinking, other sorts of things like that can be a huge problem for a lot of people that starts in law school. But really, people are very creative. They can self-sabotage in lots of different ways. Yeah. We've all done it.
I think that's very true. And so you have to kind of keep your eye out for these self-sabotaging behaviors, and then try and curb them as much as you can. I think that's just a wise way to think about it. And if you're really, really not able to curb some of these behaviors, then you got to go get help and find out from an expert, like a therapist or some sort of a coach, about how you can reorganize your life so you prevent some of these.
Yeah, I think cognitive behavioral therapy can be useful. Things like mindfulness, so you realize that you're getting ready to do this self-sabotaging thing, or you at least acknowledge that, okay, I'm currently procrastinating on this project, and maybe you sit with that for a little while, and you figure out, oh, it's because I don't actually want to be in law school, Right. And then you have things to deal with. But I think there are all kinds of things that could be underlying this. It could just be you're lazy, you're bored, you're tired, whatever, or there could be something more going on. So I think just kind of getting familiar with your own patterns and trying to figure out like what is going on here is probably going to help you counter them in a way that is more effective than just saying, you're too lazy, you need to work harder. Right. That's probably not going to help.
Right. I've also found journaling for some folks can be very helpful. It allows you to kind of take a moment and reflect during the day. You want to make sure that if you are doing some sort of journaling, that you make sure that there is also a positive element to it. So I oftentimes recommend that students kind of can talk about like what went well during the day, what went not so well, and then what their intentions are for the next day. So you always finish the journal entry with the intentions for the next day, which are usually more positive. And that's a way to keep yourself accountable for some of these, maybe some of these goals or some of these behaviors you're trying to shift, but it doesn't let you continue to just get down on yourself and be like, I promised myself I wouldn't watch TV, but I ended up watching 4 hours of TV and I'm such a terrible person. That's not productive journaling. So, right. Or you can say,
I wasn't supposed to watch TV, so I watched an hour of TV. Okay, I'm a terrible person, so now I'm going to watch 5 more hours of TV.
Right, exactly. Instead you can say, I wasn't supposed to watch any TV, but I watched an hour. Tomorrow I'm going to set the intention not to watch any, and we'll try again. I think that there are different ways that you can do it that it can be very helpful, but you do want to be aware that you're not just spiraling yourself down the rabbit hole.
Dear diary, I am a terrible person and I had a terrible day. Let me tell you all about it.
So, overall, I think what's really important is to just try and keep perspective and occasionally get out of the law school bubble. You're going to be happier. You're probably going to be more successful. And remember, law school just isn't about grades. You need to be networking inside and outside of the law school and developing lasting relationships. And it's still years of your life. Life is happening while you're in law school. So
you might meet your eventual husband or whatever, right?
Yeah, like lots of life happens in law school. So go ahead and, and enjoy it as much as you can and look for those opportunities, because this might be the last time you're ever in school. This might be the last time you can go to yoga class at 2:00 in the afternoon or go to Trader Joe's at 10:00 in the morning before the parking lot gets crazy. There are lots of benefits to being in school. So try and look on the bright side and make sure that you're enjoying the experience and you're not just trudging through it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Yes, it's a difficult experience, but as you mentioned earlier, it's also a privilege. And the more you can find ways to make yourself a happier person while you're going about it, probably you're going to do better. And also, most importantly, you're probably going to end up in a position that makes you happier than one where you're just doing what your professors or your family or whoever is telling you have to do.
Yeah. And with that, I think we're out of time.
We're way out of time.
We're way out of time. Sorry, guys. We had a lot to say. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.